All right, welcome to the deep dive. You know how this works, right? You send us the sources, we go spelunking and bring back the gold. That's right, those core insights and knowledge all neatly packaged for you. Efficient, memorable, just what you need.
That's us, knowledge miners extraordinaire. Always a thrill to dive into new territory.
Absolutely. And this time, it's personal. We're talking about the early life of Bill Gates. You sent us some incredible excerpts, his own reflections on his journey.
Formative years, those crucial building blocks, from his childhood family dynamics all the way to his initial foray into the hallowed halls of Harvard.
Exactly. And we're not just recounting events. We're going deep, trying to really grasp what shaped his curiosity, his intellect, those factors that paved the way for, well, everything that came after.
Those early influences, they can be so powerful, so subtle sometimes. But when you really examine them, the patterns start to emerge.
It's like a puzzle, almost. We have some fascinating pieces here. Right off the bat, he talks about his older sister, Christy. Even in preschool, she was the epitome of organization. Meanwhile, he was, well, let's just say not quite as enthusiastic about structure. He even mentions struggling with, get this, putting on his coat.
A classic tale of siblings, right?
Yeah.
Two totally different approaches to the world, even within the same family. She's all about order. He's a bit more, shall we say, free-spirited. And it makes you wonder, does that early contrast play a role later on, in his willingness to break the mold?
It's a great question. And then, of course, we have the undeniable force that was his mother, Mary Maxwell Gates. Talk about a powerhouse. She was fiercely determined for her children to succeed.
Yeah.
But her definition of success was broader, more nuanced.
It wasn't just about wealth, although that was certainly part of the equation. It was about reputation, making a real contribution to the community, almost like a modern-day Kennedy matriarch, wouldn't you say?
Totally. And her approach to parenting was so deliberate. The whole mom time concept, even setting the clocks ahead, that speaks volumes about her organizational skills.
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget those meticulously planned Christmas celebrations, every detail accounted for. Structure, tradition, creating lasting family memories, it's all there. You can almost see how that emphasis on intention and organization might have influenced him.
Definitely. And it wasn't just his mother. His maternal grandmother, Gami, as they called her, played a big role too. She was this fiercely competitive game player. Imagine, even mini-golf during their weekend visits turned into a serious showdown.
She sounds like a real character. And what's interesting is that despite her Christian Science background, a faith with pretty specific beliefs, she never pushed those onto the family. That speaks volumes about her tolerance, her respect for individual choices.
And that focus on games, competition, it might seem trivial, but it's not. It's a subtle way to develop strategic thinking, a drive to excel.
Right. It wasn't just about having fun. It was about figuring out how to win, playing within the rules, all those valuable lessons. And it's fascinating to see the contrast between his parents' families, his mother's side, the Maxwells. They were all about ambition, financial success. His great-grandfather made a real mark in banking.
But on his father's side, the Gateses, things were a bit more precarious financially. His grandfather, for example, really struggled to keep his furniture store afloat.
Such a stark difference. On one hand, security, ambition, a legacy of achievement. On the other, financial anxiety, perhaps a drive to overcome those struggles. It makes you wonder how those contrasting narratives might have shaped his own worldview.
Absolutely. And his father, despite his family's background, had these intellectual aspirations himself. He connected with the Brahman family, who were quite the entrepreneurial bunch.
Oh, those Brahmin folks, they were something else. A hamburger stand, backyard circus, you name it, they tried it. That kind of exposure to the world of creating, building, taking risks, it had to have an impact.
Especially on a young, impressionable mind. And those family dinners, intentionally modeled after the Kennedys, they weren't just about food. They were a forum for discussion, learning, keeping up with current events.
No zoning out with a book allowed at that table. They were engaging, debating, sharpening their minds. Imagine that kind of intellectual environment every night.
And it wasn't just at home. Those annual trips to Cheerio Lodge cottages, a real sense of community there. His dad even became this unofficial mayor of Cheerio. But it's his mom's draw family for dinner scheme that really stands out.
What a brilliant idea. Imagine instead of just random mingling, you draw names, end up having dinner with a different family each night. Exposure to role models, different perspectives.
It's intentional community building, almost like a social experiment in a way. And it wasn't all grand gestures. Even the simple tradition of making handmade Christmas cards each year that instilled a sense of continuity, personal connection.
Absolutely. Those small traditions, they build a family identity. And then we have the epic family road trip to Los Angeles in 1963. It's not just a vacation, though. His mother creates this meticulously detailed travel log.
Yeah, this wasn't your average, we went here, we ate this kind of log. This thing was designed to teach, geography, geology, even a bit of math. It was all about noticing things, learning from the journey.
Transforming an everyday experience into a learning opportunity. That's brilliant. Okay, so we've got this rich, intentionally crafted family environment. But what about him? What were those early interests, those glimmers of the person he'd become?
Well, even as a very young child, he had this distinctive rocking habit. He described it himself as a metronome for his brain. It's like his mind was constantly in motion, processing, even back then.
Fascinating. A mind that never really rests, always working things out. And then there's the family visit to the 1962 World's Fair in Seattle. You'd think the IBM Pavilion would be the highlight for a future tech giant, right?
Not quite. He actually talks about being more captivated by the daredevil water skiers and the wild mouse ride. It was Paul Allen, his future partner, who really fixated on the computers at the fair.
It's a good reminder that early passions can be unpredictable, diverse. It doesn't always map neatly onto your future path. But that atmosphere of the fair, that technological optimism, the sense of limitless potential, it had to have an impact.
Oh, for sure. He was also a voracious reader from a young age, often feeling that school was just too slow for him. That classic bright kid, eager to absorb knowledge.
We've all met those kids. And then something shifts in 5th grade. Math becomes his thing. He talks about the ironclad certainty of it, how it boosted his intellectual confidence. His father even observed that he seemed to mature almost overnight.
It's like a key unlocks something in his mind. The world starts to make sense in a new way. But 5th grade wasn't all smooth sailing. At Laurelhurst Elementary, he felt like an outsider, being younger, smaller than his classmates. He was very aware of the social dynamics, the pecking order.
It's a reminder that intellectual development doesn't always match up with social or emotional maturity. Fitting in can be tough for a kid who's different, ahead of the curve.
And this is where that Delaware project comes in. Who dives into a school project with this level of intensity? He researched everything, the history, tourism, even wrote fictional accounts, compiled a whole report on the DuPont company.
That's not just completing an assignment. That's genuine intellectual curiosity. He wasn't satisfied with the surface level. He had to go deep.
Exactly. He wasn't just checking boxes. He was engaged, driven to learn. He did participate in other activities like skiing and tennis, but admitted his preference was always being in his own head. That internal world was where he thrived.
And as he enters adolescence, there's some friction with his parents. Classic teenage rebellion, maybe. It actually leads to family therapy. And the therapist, Dr. Cressy, gives him some rather surprising advice. Give it up, he says. Give him more freedom.
Imagine that. It's like acknowledging that this kid needs space to explore, to make his own choices. So we've got this family background, these early interests, and then comes Lakeside School, this prestigious private boys' school.
A real turning point, and it wasn't all smooth sailing at first. He wasn't thrilled about going there initially.
I can imagine. It's a different world, right? Lakeside had this reputation as a feeder school for the elite colleges. But it's there he meets Kent Evans, who becomes this incredibly close friend.
Kent was something special himself. He had physical challenges, but this fearless spirit, a deep interest in politics. They even had this quirky habit of marking their French quizzes with the initials of presidential candidates.
I love that. It's like these little glimpses into their personalities. The friendship really solidifies during a disastrous camping trip, one of those shared adversity bonding experiences. Their tent gets completely flooded.
Classic. You go through something like that together, it creates a bond. And they spend hours poring over biographies of leaders, trying to figure out their own paths. They consider everything, the military, the foreign service. But nothing quite clicks.
And then, in the fall of his 8th grade year, everything changes. Lakeside gets a computer terminal. It's almost like fate, isn't it?
Talk about being in the right place at the right time. And he just takes to it, He describes his first experience programming in BASIC, the elegance of the code. He creates a tic-tac-toe game. And right away, he grasps that fundamental concept. The computer is a dumb machine.
It needs precise instructions, logical thinking. And that's where he excels.
Absolutely. It plays to his strengths. And then enters Paul Allen. Their initial experiences with the computer were quite different, but Paul was always pushing him, challenging him. They had this great dynamic.
They were competitive, but in a good way. It pushed them both to learn faster, to try new things. Rick Weiland joined the group too, and suddenly you've got this powerhouse team. They weren't content with the limited computer time at school, though. They managed to get access to a time-sharing system at a company called C-Cubed.
Talk about resourceful. They went beyond the confines of the school, actively seeking out opportunities to learn and experiment. They even resorted to dumpster diving for discarded code. That's dedication.
It shows you how hungry they were for knowledge.
Right.
He talks about wanting to create something real, even writing a program to retrieve his mother's meatloaf recipe. It might seem silly, but it marks a shift, right?
Definitely. It's applying his skills to a practical problem, even a lighthearted one. And when their free access at C-Cubed ends, he doesn't just sit around. He does ballroom dancing, Boy Scouts, even attempts that grueling 50-mile hike.
Which, by the way, did not go well initially. But he eventually conquers that 50-mile trail, even tackles a tough backpacking trip to Vancouver Island. It's like that summer was a test of his resilience, his physical limits.
Pushing himself in different ways. And don't forget, this is the summer of the Apollo 11 moon landing.
A pivotal moment in history, a testament to human ambition. And he achieves this amazing feat back at school, too. As an 8th grader, he aces the upper school math team exam. Even a senior student acknowledges his talent.
That's a serious validation of his abilities. And he pulls this clever move with his high school textbooks, requesting 2 copies of each. It allowed him to appear as though he wasn't studying at home while secretly putting in the work.
Smart strategy. He wasn't just a bookworm, though. He talks about his physics and chemistry classes, the influence of his teacher, Dr. Morris, who instilled in him this belief that the world makes sense. And of course, there's the infamous exploding liquid prank.
Can't forget that. A little bit of mischief, a reminder that even brilliant minds like to have fun. But when their access to C-Cubed ends, he explores other intellectual avenues. He reads the New Testament, delves into books on Christianity.
It's like he's seeking answers, exploring different ways of understanding the world. And then there's that sailing trip with Ken's family, where they get hooked on playing stocks and bonds.
That sparks their interest in the world of business, right? Suddenly, they're devouring Fortune, the Wall Street Journal, even researching local executive salaries.
They're not just playing games anymore. They're fascinated by the real-world applications of finance economics. They're even asked to computerize Lakeside's class scheduling system. They initially turn it down. But Ken ends up teaching the introductory computer science class.
So they're giving back, sharing their knowledge with the school community. But their thirst for more computing power leads them to this audacious move, hacking into the system of a company called ISI.
Classic. It's that combination of technical brilliance and a little bit of rule bending, a hallmark of many early tech pioneers. They eventually get a legitimate job with ISI, and they're so focused they even allocate computer time amongst themselves based on who they think is doing the most productive work.
They're already running their own mini operation, and they don't start there. They secure access to the University of Washington Computer Science Lab, expanding their resources even further.
But there's a growing rift in the group. Paul and Rick on one side, Kent and him, increasingly focused on finishing the payroll program for ISI. It's a natural evolution, right? As people grow, their interests diverge.
Absolutely. And then tragedy strikes. Kent dies in a mountaineering accident. It's a devastating loss, a profound experience for him.
He even mentions being unable to read his prepared remarks at the memorial service. The grief was just too overwhelming. But the outpouring of sympathy from others, that showed the depth of their connection.
It's a stark reminder of how fragile life is. And despite the immense grief, he and Paul keep working on the scheduling program, finding solace in their shared passion. Meanwhile, Paul's getting deeper into music, Jimi Hendrix, that whole "are you experienced" mantra.
It's like 2 parallel paths, both fueled by intense passion and creativity. And then comes the college application process. He's strategic about it, tailoring his persona for each university: Princeton for engineering, Yale for government and law, Harvard for business and law. He even participates in a drama production, showing a different facet of himself.
He's exploring, testing the waters, figuring out where he fits in, and he lands this incredible summer job at TRW working on the Bonneville Power Administration project. It's a real-world challenge, a chance to apply his skills on a massive scale.
His mom's a bit apprehensive, naturally, but Lakeside's headmaster actually advocates for him. He even compares it to the time tunnel, that immersive experience of being thrown into a different world.
The headmaster recognizes the value of this opportunity, the kind of learning you can't get in a classroom, and the project itself is fascinating. They're tasked with ensuring the continuous flow of power, no interruptions, high stakes.
He manages to return to Lakeside for his final trimester, even participates in another drama production, and asks Vicky to the senior prom. You know, a touch of normalcy amidst all this extraordinary stuff.
A reminder that even amidst all the ambition and achievement, he's still a teenager going through those universal rites of passage. And he talks about how the story of DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, really inspired him. It's like a blueprint for their own potential company.
And Paul, ever the visionary, is urging him to skip Harvard altogether, start a company focused on microprocessors. It's tempting, right, to dive headfirst into this exciting new field.
But he feels this pull towards college, wanting to test himself against a wider pool of talent, to experience that intellectual environment. He even admits that he initially believed innovation came from lone geniuses. But the collaborative success of the Lakeside scheduling program hinted at the power of teamwork.
It's like he's recognizing that he can achieve more by working with others, combining different strengths. And then he arrives at Harvard, and almost immediately, there's this cutting-edge DEC PDP-10 computer installed at the Aiken Computation Laboratory, thanks to funding from DARPA, the agency behind ARPANET, a precursor to the internet.
Talk about a playground for a brilliant mind. The access to that kind of computing power, it must have been irresistible. And the fact that it was connected to ARPANET, that puts him right at the forefront of this emerging network technology.
It's like destiny calling.
Yeah.
And of course, he's determined to get access to the HARF-10, even though it's primarily for graduate students. He starts interacting with Professor Tom Cheatham, the lab director. He's not going to be deterred by any bureaucratic barriers.
He sees the opportunity and he goes for it. And he makes some interesting choices with his roommates. Sam Znamer from Montreal, Jim Jenkins from rural Tennessee. It's a deliberate decision to expose himself to different backgrounds, different perspectives.
He's learning outside the classroom, broadening his understanding of the world. And he's not shying away from academic challenges either. He enrolls in introductory electrical engineering and the notoriously difficult Math 55A and 55B sequence advanced calculus. This is serious stuff.
Math 55, that's a legend. It's designed to weed out all but the most dedicated and talented math students. And his professor, John Mather, he had this unconventional teaching style, so abstract that there were no numbers involved.
Imagine that. It's like learning math in pure concepts, a real test of abstract thinking. The Aiken Lab quickly becomes his home away from home. He spends countless late nights there, immersed in his virtual baseball program. It's that single-minded focus that fuels his progress.
He's finding his element, where he can fully immerse himself in his passion. But he doesn't limit himself to just computer science. He takes an organic chemistry course, but actually gets his lowest grade in college.
A bit of a reality check, right? It forces him to reevaluate his self-perception, to realize that maybe he's not universally the smartest.
It's a valuable lesson. Even brilliant minds have their limits. And when he meets with his academic advisor, expressing his desire to take graduate-level computer science courses, he gets labeled as precocious. He actually looks up the definition and realizes it fits. He's comfortable with that adult knowledge.
He's ahead of the curve, embracing challenges beyond his years. But he also comes to the realization that some of his peers in Math 55 are just naturally more gifted at pure mathematics than he is. It's a pivotal moment, a shift in his long-term aspirations, away from a purely mathematical career path.
It's about recognizing where your true strengths lie, where your passions are most intense. He's not giving up on math, but he's recognizing that his future might lie elsewhere. And through all this, he's staying connected to Paul back at WSU, talking about the latest developments in computing. They even create resumes, just in case.
Always thinking ahead. And he's surprised to get an interview at DEC, even gets flown in by helicopter. It's a glimpse into the world of professional tech, a sign of things to come.
A bit of validation, a taste of what might be possible, and he still has to navigate the demands of college life. He talks about his intense study habits at Widener Library, cramming for exams. It even gave him those unsettling dreams.
It's a reminder that even with all his brilliance, he's still going through the same struggles as other students. Sophomore year, he's living in Courier House with his friends, while Paul's holed up in their apartment dubbed the Grinch, completely immersed in the world of microprocessors.
Paul's a man on a mission. He's got ideas for a computer company, a consumer time-sharing service. He's seeing the potential before anyone else, but he's still cautious about hardware development. The Trafo data experience left its mark.
It taught them some valuable lessons, even if it wasn't a resounding success. And despite those past challenges, the two Pauls back in Seattle eventually make progress with the Trafo data hardware. Meanwhile, he's deep into coding BASIC for the Altair, using Paul's simulator on the Harv 10.
It's an intense period, laying the foundation for their future success, and that crucial phone call he makes to Emites, clarifying the Altair's input-output capabilities, it's a turning point. It sets the stage for Paul's trip to MIT's.
And before Paul heads out, they spend an entire night checking the Intel 8080 manual against Paul's simulator. No room for error. They're meticulous, ensuring their software is flawless.
That level of dedication is remarkable. They're not just playing around, they're committed to delivering a high-quality product. But all this late-night activity in the Aiken lab catches the attention of the university.
He gets confronted by the associate director, ends up facing a disciplinary hearing. Expulsion's a real possibility. It's that clash between his entrepreneurial ambitions and the rules of the university.
It's a high-stakes moment, but he writes a letter to the board, taking responsibility but pleading his case. He's not backing down.
He's fighting for his future. And amidst all this turmoil, he's still pushing forward with BASIC, developing the 8K and 12K versions. And their friend Rick, he comes out as gay. It's a reminder that personal lives are unfolding alongside these professional ambitions.
It's a complex time with so much happening at once. And as Microsoft starts to take shape, the roles naturally divide. Paul's the tech genius, and he takes on the business side. They land Emites as their first customer, a huge step forward.
Persistence pays off.
Yeah.
It takes long-distance calls, Paul's trip to Albuquerque, but they seal the deal. And they quickly realize they need more customers. Sales and marketing become essential.
They're learning as they go, adapting to the demands of building a real business. And the early days in Albuquerque, it's not glamorous. They're sharing an office with Emites. Rick's working on 6800 BASIC. Ed Roberts, the head of Mites, even calls him the kid.
A bit of an underdog story, right? They're young, scrappy, but determined to succeed. They're traveling in their Blue Goose camper van, writing articles for the Emites newsletter. They even go to a conference in Kansas City to advocate for a cassette tape data storage standard.
They're hustling, putting themselves out there. They're not just coders anymore, they're entrepreneurs, building a brand.
And he's still incredibly optimistic about the future of personal computers, even with the emergence of competitors like Tiny Basic. He tries to balance running Microsoft with being a full-time student at Harvard, much to his parents' dismay.
It's a tough balancing act. His dad even turns down a federal judgeship around this time, perhaps a sign of their growing support for his entrepreneurial path.
He goes back to Harvard after Christmas break. But the pull of Microsoft is too strong. They just landed their first major customer beyond Emites. It's a turning point. They even write a letter outlining their two main goals for Microsoft: growth, reputation, and of course, making money.
They're crystallizing their vision, setting ambitious goals. And that summer, Businessweek publishes an article highlighting the rapid adoption of microcomputers. The world's taking notice.
But managing Microsoft from afar is proving increasingly difficult. He's frustrated with business deals, travel expenses, disagreements with Emites over royalties. It's all coming to a head.
The growing pains of a successful startup, those inevitable challenges of scaling up. And he pours all this frustration into a late-night letter to Paul and Rick, laying out his directives, highlighting their knowledge gaps.
It's a wake-up call, a realization that they need more than just technical expertise. They need to master HR, contracts, finance, all those crucial aspects of running a business. And they take a big step. They move into their first real headquarters in Albuquerque.
It's a symbol of their commitment, a sign that they're in it for the long haul, and they score some major wins. Commodore and Texas Instruments, these giants, they express interest in licensing their BASIC.
Validation from the industry heavyweights, that's huge. But their friend Rick decides to leave Microsoft, move to Los Angeles. It's a reminder that personal paths can diverge, even within a tight-knit group.
It's a natural part of life. People change, priorities shift, and they debut the Commodore PE 2001 at the Consumer Electronics Show. This is a big moment, their software being showcased on a major platform.
A real milestone. And despite their differences, he and Paul have this incredible bond. They're pushing each other, challenging each other, but they're in it together.
It's a classic partnership, each bringing their unique strengths to the table. But they're not living together anymore. He buys his own Porsche 911, even starts driving bulldozers at the cement plant for fun.
He's got that drive, that need to push boundaries, even outside of work. And the MIT's contract negotiations, they get intense. He insists on not granting them an exclusive license. He's playing hardball, protecting their future.
He's learning the art of the deal, understanding the importance of leverage. They hire Paul Mines as their lawyer, gearing up for a legal battle. And those arbitration hearings with an Emites, he goes in there with his Kent-like briefcase, ready to fight for what they've built.
He's channeling his friend's spirit, his determination. It's a high-pressure situation, but they come out on top. And he doesn't forget his team. He takes all the Microsoft employees out to lunch after the hearings, a gesture of appreciation and camaraderie.
He's building a company culture, fostering loyalty. And they're not resting on their laurels. He reaches out to Apple, Tandy, trying to secure more licensing deals.
He's got that relentless drive, always looking for the next opportunity. And he lands a deal with Apple. It's a major win, a sign that they're becoming a real force in the industry.
They're on their way to becoming a household name. And that meeting with John Roach at Tandy's headquarters, it's another step forward, another potential partnership.
They're playing the long game, building relationships, expanding their reach. It's incredible to see how far they've come, from that first computer terminal at Lakeside to this burgeoning empire.
It's a testament to their vision, their hard work, their willingness to take risks. It all started with a spark of curiosity, a passion for technology, and a unique set of circumstances that brought them together.
It's an incredible journey, and it's just the beginning. But what about us? You know, the listeners, what can we take away from all this?
Well, I think it highlights the importance of early influences, the power of curiosity, that relentless pursuit of knowledge.
The impact of relationships, too. Those key friendships, mentors, they can shape our trajectory.
Absolutely. And the willingness to take risks, to embrace challenges, to learn from both successes and failures.
It's about recognizing opportunities, even when they seem unconventional. And maybe, just maybe, those seemingly insignificant moments from our past, those little quirks, those passions we buried, they might hold the key to our own future breakthroughs.
It's worth exploring, isn't it? What seemingly insignificant nugget from your own history might hold the key to your next big insight. Food for thought, right?
Definitely. So listeners, that's our deep dive for today. Keep those minds churning, and we'll see you next time.